I believe now I have your attention. I gazed down at the video call on my phone. A woman sat alone in a dimly lit room, the only light coming from the screen, and a lonely, flickering candlelight behind her. Her face was pale. Delicate features with an aquiline nose and rich, warm brown eyes that stared at me through the screen. It felt like she was staring deep into my soul, and I didn't know whether to be lured in by her or to flee while I still had a chance. I know she was showing me what I wanted to see, not the red, malicious eyes I knew lingered under the surface. Deep down, I knew the time for escape was long gone. I looked anywhere but at the screen, but in the corner of my eye, I could see her still staring at me. "Yes, you have it," I answered bitterly. I exhaled, and finally felt relieved when I complied with her wishes. "I take it you remember the past 3 nights?" she asked, an ebony, elegantly styled eyebrow raised in amusement at my discomfort. There was no way I could forget the past 3 nights of pure hell. I've never been in so much pain. I haven't been able to rest nor sleep. No water satisfied my thirst. No food could rid me of my ravenous hunger. And nor would any amount of climaxes free me of my longing for intimate touch. Each part of day and night brought its own challenges. The sunlight burned my eyes and irritated my skin, causing me to become a recluse, hiding away in the darkness. All food tasted like ash in my mouth, and I couldn't keep anything down anyway. I'd vomit it up, my body rejecting all forms of normal food as a foreign body. Every single time I closed my eyes, I would see her staring back at me. I'd hear her voice whisper to me softly, and struggle to hear what she was saying. I'd see images of fangs, snarling teeth, and blood dripping from the walls. An empty room with a single bath full of blood. Her unadorned body coated with every curve visible, while the blood drained out onto the floor, surrounding me. Her elegant hand held a chalice, filled to the brim with blood. It was dripping down onto her body, only to be brought to her lips before being offered to me. Worst of all, I reached out to it with my hands, accepting and hungrily drinking the liquid, loving each and every sensation it granted me. Memories of death and bloodshed throughout history that didn't belong to me. Several lifetimes untold by historians, and normally I would have loved to learn about them, read them, not experience them all at once. I saw temples inside ancient Rome before the fall, and she sought out those who participated in Rome's appetites. Medieval battles where the dead littered the battlefield, and plague roamed the lands. I saw the rise of machines, and all leading up to the mere months when she managed to find me, feed on me, and when I felt the change strike. Her hunting ground had changed with the times. No longer did she stalk the battlefields, seeking out those on the cusp of death. Even a reaper was driven away by the dark offering she granted one unfortunate soul. All the memories were exhilarating, filled with lust, blood, and death. I hated how a part of me wished to live that life, to seek out the ideal prey, to hunt them down, to sink my teeth into their skin to drain them, and I had to smack it down. Each time, it was getting more difficult to resist the urge. I noticed in how I changed around people, or rather, I no longer managed to. I never liked spending too much time with people I didn't know, but I loved spending time with the people I cared about. Now, I could barely stand to be around them. Their voices caused me to have headaches, and bright lights that caused my eyes to burn, and the sound of their heartbeat would near drive me to insanity. At nighttime, the lure to hunt was strongest, and one I couldn't deny. "I know you haven't fed. No, Not yet, but you will need to in order to survive. She mused, leaned back in her chair, and watched my reactions. I dug my fingernails into my palms, my body tense. I wouldn't be able to resist the temptation for long. A feeling of weakness had taken hold of me, and was steadily growing stronger. I knew I'd end up attacking someone. I feared it would come to that. I had to escape my apartment. With my roommates in the next room, the temptation to enter to feast on them was too great. Plus, there were too many people who lived close nearby, and I didn't like having them too close. I paid all my bills in advance, and left a note that I was coming back. Then I booked an overpriced Airbnb for a month, using a considerable amount of my savings to stay away from everyone, to keep me, and them, safe. A cabin in the woods away from people to give me the space I needed. Or so I thought. However, being a city girl, I still wanted to be close to any amenities, and unfortunately, that meant I was still close to people. I could hear people walk and chat as they moved through the neighboring forest, the boundary close to my new backyard. The sound of their heartbeats were like drums, beating repeatedly to taunt me into the chase. And every day, I had to fight the urge to stalk them. I did anything to distract myself, but it never worked. Perhaps if I chose somewhere much more remote, it wouldn't have been an issue. I looked out through the window, disturbed by how well I could see the trees, individual leaves, and even the lines of the bark of the tree. Small details I normally wouldn't have noticed. As my gaze moved around the room to avoid hers, I could make out the furniture in the dark room, only lit up by my phone. I could see further beyond what was humanly possible. My eyes had always been poor. In ordinary circumstances, this would have been a blessing. I couldn't escape her question. No, I haven't fed. I don't want to. I shook my head, trying to escape my thoughts. Already, she was pushing images of feeding, moaning and kissing, while lapping up the blood of a faceless victim. I don't want to hurt anyone. Most people say that before they feed. Most mortals also struggle to stick to a diet, even when they know there are health benefits, and their current one puts their lives at risk. She wasn't wrong. She mockingly revealed a fang. If I happened to bring a small child, or a beloved family member or friend, I know you would resist. You'd listen while they spoke to you, and the blood coursing through their veins would be torture. Heaven forbid they should accidentally bleed. She mused, imagining my change, and for a brief moment our minds were one. I could see everything she was saying to me. They'd plead for you to spare them, to rescue them, and all the while, you'd sink your fangs into their tender flesh. I could taste their blood, and I sharply looked away before whatever hold broke. I didn't answer her. I was too ashamed. Deep down, I knew she was right, and I didn't know whether I hated myself or her in this moment. I'd try, I answered feebly. I'd try to hold out as long as possible. I attempted to disassociate, and staring down at my folded hands, fingertips idly pressed together while my knuckles showed white, I could feel her gaze linger on me, her power coursing through my veins, and clawing, twisting inside me. And the heat, it was unbearable. Deep down, I knew I couldn't deny her for long. A part of me wanted to let her in completely. I see, she mused. An artist with her art, or perhaps a puppeteer with their powerless puppet. I'll call you tomorrow. Enjoy your night. The phone beeped when the call ended. I stared down at the unknown call number. I was tempted to pick it up, call her, and scream at her before breaking my phone to sever any contact. I rested my face in my hands, groaned, regretting all my decisions, leading up to an encounter with her. We first met several months ago now, inside a relatively mellow place, a library. I was returning books late at night for my brother, and I got there just when it was being locked up. The librarian offered me an apologetic look and pointed to the delivery chute to return books outside of business hours. I walked over, rummaging through my bag, and pushed them through, hearing them drop on the other side. I stared at my expression in the reflection, turned on my heel, and saw her standing uncomfortably close. "Hello?" I asked, unable to hide my irritated thoughts about the intrusion, and I stepped back, instinctively, trying to put distance between us. She wore a long fawn-colored jacket, tightly belted at the waist, and smiled, not showing her teeth. Her eyebrows were immaculate, her hair a black curly bob that framed her face. Petite in build, bordering on frail, and with skin so pale I thought it was artificial. I wondered why she was out so late. I couldn't put a finger on it, yet there was something uncanny about her. She didn't speak. I gulped, kept walking, and she blocked my path. Once, twice, and each time I tried to move around her. "To feed or turn you," she purred. This time when she smiled, it exposed a razor-sharp fang, surrounded by blood-red lips. It took me a moment to register what she said. "Excuse me, get out of the way!" I snapped, sounding more frightened than I intended. I thought she was out of her mind, and headed straight to my car, the only one left in the parking lot, lit up under a streetlight in hopes of staying safe. My hand shuffling in my handbag, trying to find my keys, and fortunately, I found them. I glanced backward to see her watching me, but she hadn't moved. A hand rested on her hip, and I could have sworn she was smiling now. I got to my car, put my key inside the lock, and opened the door, tossing my bag inside, and got in without waiting. Turning the key, the engine turned on, and I put my seatbelt on. Stealing a glance in her direction, I saw she was closer now, maybe 5 meters away from the car, and still staring at me. I drove out the exit and down the road. My chest was tight. I felt like I finally stopped holding my breath once I was out of sight of the library. "What a crazy bitch," I whispered to myself, driving all the way home, and got out of my car. I unlocked the front door and closed it behind me. I didn't see any cars follow me home. I flicked on the light to see her seated comfortably at my kitchen table. Her hands gently rested on the circular table that had been cleared. Her fingertips gently tapped, and it looked as though she had been waiting for me. She sat in the shadowed part, a dangerous silhouette, and her eyes glowed red across from me. What? I gasped, then struggled to unlock the door to get out. When I realized I was locked inside with her, I unlocked it and tried to open it, yet it remained shut. There was no logical reason why the door shouldn't open. I pushed and pulled on it, but it was no use. I felt her stand behind me, before her chill body pressed me into the door, and I weakly pushed up with my hands. Her fingers trailed through my auburn hair, releasing halfway, and I was too stunned to do anything. I figured I would make myself at home. She purred, close to my ear, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my chest. Her finger trailed along the vein in my neck, barely a touch, and I tried to push back, only for her to shove me against the door. "How did you get in here?" I whispered, my eyes wide in fright, and my fingertips dug into the wood. "You don't remember me, do you?" And the only place I ran into her was at the library. I was certain I would remember someone like this. My eyes moved from side to side in thought. When I remembered a dream I had when I was a teenager, I froze, the memory fresh, as though it was happening again. I finally recognized her face. It was a typical dream. Amorous. Lust-filled with connecting bodies. An experimental desire drove me forward. Our lips met time and time again. The softness and taste of her lips left me longing for more. Her clothing was different in the dream. It was more casual. Her dark hair parted to one side and flowed down her shoulders. Her perfume was touched by lilies. It was nighttime, and we spent the weekend together, walking, movies, all with the promise of more, yet never going all the way. Leaning on the door, we were kissing on my family's front step at nighttime, our hands caressing each other's curves, and exposing our bodies to the cold night air. When her dream form asked if I wanted more, a hushed yes escaped my lips, and I brought her inside, allowing her access to my home. I opened the door and took her by the hand to lead her inside. Only now realizing my error, I had invited whatever she was into my home. I closed my eyes, lowered my forehead in defeat until it touched the surface of the door. Ah, I see you remember me now. What about your promise? Promise? Yes, you promised me something all those long years ago. I couldn't remember what I said. I dismissed it as a dream where my desires were tested and I never saw her again. I kept thinking, I don't know. I don't remember. I whispered. Desperate for the memory, my head turned to the side, and out of the corner of my eye, her cat-like eyes lit up with amusement. I yelped when I felt her bite me with sharp teeth digging into my skin. I felt woozy, and her words circled in my mind. Just because your memory fails you doesn't mean you get to escape it. Before a reply came from my lips, in a blur we moved to the couch, and we were seated there. My head spun, and there was no way movement like that was natural. The speed made me nauseous. It took time for my eyes to adjust to no longer moving. My head was tilted. One of her hands held me by the hair and exposed the side of my neck. I was drawn across her lap. She reached into her pocket, and I felt a cold metal tip on my neck. I grit my teeth and found I couldn't move. My limbs were heavy and useless. What's happening to me? What did you do? Venom, my love. It protects us both. I don't want you to accidentally hurt me or yourself. The metal tips caressed my scalp, and I loathed my helplessness. Venom? While I couldn't move, all my sensations were perfectly in place. In fact, any caress to my skin was heightened. I wasn't sure when the venom would stop working. Then I could make my escape and finally get away. She laughed. It was both terrifying and alluring, a sound I hated hearing. I realized now she could read my thoughts. I felt her inside my mind, appearing as a shadow version of herself, walking through my memories. And here too I was powerless to stop her. Why? Why are you doing this? I felt my lips move, but no sound came out. Please, let me go. I promise not to tell anyone you've been here. I saw the dual forms of her, the physical and the mental. Deep down I knew there was no escape for me. Her mind form trailed her hands over my treasured memories, those with family and friends. I saw the faces of my parents, my sister and mother, my closest friends, and even all the lovers I had in the past. Every secret was exposed to her. Before I could protest, she plunged her hand into the memory of my parents. I reflected on my childhood, my turbulent teenage years, my college years of friction, and finally, the distance between us during my adulthood. Each one was private, not to be shared. She stirred her hand, taunting me. Then suddenly she yanked it out, and I couldn't remember what was taken from me. I know there was a void, something missing, and yet it was lost to me. What are you doing? What did you do? I'm freeing you. Don't worry, it will all be over soon, she answered. Unfortunately for me, she had barely begun. Why do you cling to these? Some are so painful for you. The memories of my first ill-fated relationship ending. I remembered and felt the heartbreak. The loss still left a pit in my heart, despite knowing it was for the best for both of us. He desired a biological family and my tastes were clearly elsewhere. We were friends for a long time before drifting apart, never speaking to each other again. They're part of me, I whispered, before the pain of the memory passed and all recollection faded into nothing. One by one, they were removed from me, creating a dual sense of bliss and emptiness. Her fangs connected with my skin. Her lips circled around the wound, and I felt her suck the blood from my neck. Her fingertips gripped my shoulder, keeping me in place, and I gasped. It barely hurt now. Instead, it was becoming pleasurable. My eyesight blurred, and I soon found myself in a dreamless sleep. I blinked awake, the moonlight gazing in through the window, and I stretched, when I saw a man tied to a chair, bound with rope, and his muffled whimpers alerted me. I pushed my body upright, and I could smell the mud and bark on his boots. He had been in the forest for some time before being found. I stood up. The cabin was freezing cold, and I rubbed my hands on my bare upper arms. The moonlight trailed inside, lighting the room up, and I noticed he didn't hear me approach. I placed my hands gently on his arms to comfort him, only for him to give a muffled squeal and he jumped. I wanted his blood. My hands moved over his bare chest, and those sounds only encouraged me to continue. I pressed my nails into him, feebly tearing into the skin and barely scratching the surface. I kept going and only trace amounts of blood came up. Barely a pinprick escaped his skin, and I lapped it up hungrily, sucking as hard as I could. He struggled, causing the chair to bounce with movement, enough to where the chair swayed backward until he fell back, hitting the floor with a grunt. I crawled on top of him, yanked his hair to one side, and roughly bit into his neck. He screeched in pain and outrage through the gag, but my teeth, without the sharp fangs, struggled to make any true progress. I turned my head from side to side, feebly trying to tear the skin, when I heard her mocking laughter ring out. Poor darling, you haven't even had time to grow your fangs yet, she teased, and I saw her seated in the shadows, the outline of her body in the chair, and I could see her petite frame, each curve highlighted by the moonlight. I blinked and my immortal gaze kicked in, to where I could see her facial features and body. She wasn't burdened with clothing, seated naked, comfortable and at ease. Her posture commanding, and I could see every outline of her body before me. Her eyes glowed, and her hand elegantly extended to offer me a knife. I could see every trace of the blade. It was mostly smooth, except for a couple of faint, jagged marks that human eyes wouldn't notice. I tersely snatched it from her, held it in my hand, and stabbed him in the neck, right down to the hilt. The sight of blood flung up into the air. When I released the knife, it burst out, and I sank my mouth onto it, sucking the blood while he faded fast. The tension in his body eased, and his head hung limp to one side. I swallowed, not wishing to waste a drop, and felt my body coated in blood. His heartbeat was slowing down, faintly beating until it fell silent, and I felt her hand on my cheek, pulling me away. So hungry. No more. You must not drink dead blood, she commanded, tilting my head upward to gaze up at her. Good. A whisper emanated from her lips, before hers met mine, and together, our naked bodies entwined on the floor. My back rested on our victim's corpse, while her kisses traveled all over my body, before I returned the favor. My body, still weak, and I didn't know why. I struggled to move and lay exhausted. She rose easily and gazed down at me. I didn't even know her name. Silly dear. You didn't eat enough. Don't worry, I'll look after you. I blinked, half falling asleep, and she lifted me up into her arms, carrying me into the bathroom that looked oddly familiar, and déjà vu plagued me. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked pale and sickly, with heavy dark circles under my eyes. I heard the bathtub fill up with water, and she placed me inside, bathing me first with gentle motions. How do I speak? Who was I? I thought to myself, only to have her answer, "You'll remember soon enough." Her words in my mind. She dried me, laid me down in a bed inside a room, both foreign and familiar. There was nothing to explain where I was, yet I couldn't escape the feeling of security I had here. I curled up on my side, my knees close to my chest, and felt the blanket covering my body. Soon, you will not fear the night nor the cold. Rest. We hunt tomorrow. I dreamt of people walking away from me. No matter how fast I run toward them, I couldn't catch them. Whenever I screamed, no sound came out. And finally, I lunged for the hand of a woman and forced her to turn to look at me. She had no face, only empty pits where her eyes and mouth should have been. I woke up at dusk in the bed, with some light yet not enough to concern myself with. Come out. I heard her voice, and wrapping a sheet around my body, I walked out to speak with her, through the hallway. This time she was dressed, her hair tied back, a shirt with a jacket, and long trousers with running shoes. I wasn't sure what to make of it. It is time for you to learn how to hunt. I will be present, but I won't involve myself. She reassured me, and I inclined my head, folded on the kitchen table were items of clothing ready for me, similar in style and color. I began putting on the clothing, first the undergarments, trousers, and reached for the shirt, taking it in my hand to see a faded blood stain. The shirt didn't quite fit. It strained around the shoulders and didn't feel natural. It wasn't mine. Together, we exited the back door and closed it behind us, and walked through the leaf-littered dirt pathways leading into the forest. The world was so vivid now. I could see colors, almost blinding in contrast between shades, and even amongst all this noise, I could hear the heartbeat of two lovers. They were naked under the shade of a tree, their bodies moving, caressing each other, moaning, completely caught in the moment, and I crept up on them. My gaze focused on them, stalking my prey, and the forest knew I was a predator. The insects were silent. He looked out from beneath his lover, hands resting on her hips, and stopped their movement. She covered her breasts as they tried to conceal their nakedness with their clothing. I crept up from behind a bush. Thus far, I had only hunted prey that was bound and helpless. How would I cope with the two of them? Go now. Show me, she urged. They decided instead to focus on their lust, and perhaps it was cruel of me to attack while they continued. Her hips rocked on top of him, their breathing changed and her hands explored his chest, arching their back to meet each other's lips. Holding the knife blade pointed downward, I walked toward them, and plunged the knife into her neck, causing her to scream. His pale eyes widened first in fear, then fury, moved her to the side, while she gripped the knife with a burst of blood flying in the air. She wouldn't live long. One hand wrapped around my neck while the other gripped the knife, twisting my hand to get me to drop it. I heard the knife fall to the ground. Out of the corner of my eye I saw her watching me, witnessing me struggle with him. He managed to push me to the ground and straddled me, hands around my throat and squeezed. It hurt, yet I didn't need to breathe, and couldn't resist a wicked laugh at his expense. It only fueled his rage, and I let out a strangled squeal when I felt the knife at my throat. I gripped his wrists, trying to pry them away, and settled for scratching down instead, causing his blood to dribble and flow. He managed to slice my neck, but lost all strength in his arms. I flipped him onto his back, seizing the knife and cut into his jugular, and wrapped my mouth around the wound, feasting on his blood. Oh dear, it would seem you're one of those kinds. She taunted me, and I gazed up at her, suckling and swallowing. Her hand reached down to inspect my neck, then seemed satisfied by what she found. Disappointing. Her fingers rested on the woman's neck now instead, licked the blood, and ran her tongue over her lips. Quite pleasant. The rarest blood type. And unfortunately, she just died. I nearly didn't hear her. Soon he was drained and on the brink of death. I released him and stood panting. Despite no longer needing to breathe, old habits died hard. She regarded me and let out an exhausted sigh. If we were inside the city, we would need to clean up. Fortunately for you. She mused, gestured to the multiple sets of glowing yellow eyes that circled us. Some were tall like people, while others walked on all fours. Even with my new eyesight, I could barely make out their figures, and they all appeared to shift from one side to another. My questions were pushed aside, and we walked back through the forest in silence. We heard other people out on a late-night walk, and I hungrily focused in their direction, longing for more blood, and her hand gripped my wrist, holding me back, and easily drew me close to her. No, not yet. Her eyes went upward to the sky. The night was yielding to the dawn. I felt a panic I couldn't explain, and she led me deep into the forest, with a cave hidden under the foliage. It was overgrown, with tall, knee-high weeds, and I saw stone slabs, some upright, while others were fallen over and had broken. A graveyard. She drew back the weeds, allowing a narrow gap to be seen, and gestured with her hand for me to enter. I crawled into the womb of the earth. My hands felt the coldness of the soil, and I felt something long and hard, realizing it was a bone. I stopped, then continued down further, until we found a snug area, with barely enough space for us both to lay down. We weren't alone. The crushed and broken bones of the previous occupant remained. We wrapped our arms around each other, holding each other close, and our lips would touch, lovingly. Sleep. It will be easier for you, she murmured, before we fell into a deep slumber. She awoke first, shielding my eyes with her hand from the sunlight entering. Be ready. It will sting your eyes. Her words soft and guiding. Her fingers parted and slowly lifted up to reveal my gaze to the sunlight. Without direct light, my eyes didn't burn. It was overwhelming seeing so much. Why did the sun hurt me so much? That is an answer none of our kind know. Go back to sleep. And without more encouragement, I drifted back to dream, with my nameless captor, or perhaps my savior, and the millions of smaller lives nestled in with us. It was dark, and the pair of us crawled out into the night, our clothing discarded on the ground, and we left to walk through the moonlight. The sky was breathtaking beyond belief. I saw the knife in her hand, and wondered when our next hunt would occur. The trees were growing fewer in number now, the dirt pathways more defined, and I realized we were heading back toward the cabin. I looked back to the womb of the earth with a deeper longing, to a point where I didn't realize I'd come to a stop until I heard her. Come. You have more lessons to learn. I turned to see her looking at me, her red eyes focused. Dark hair framed her face and swayed in the breeze. We entered the cabin, and I heard a phone ring, and saw the photo of a familiar face. Brown hair, similar features to my own, and I knew I should have felt something when I saw the word Mum on it. I knew what the word meant, yet there was no emotional connection to it. My captor took my phone in her hand, glared at it, and crushed it, immune to the pain of the glass and shards piercing her skin. It shocked me. The first time she demonstrated aggression towards something I owned. I froze when she smiled gently at me, yet still, she retained that fierce look in her eye. I stepped backward, worried for my safety, and her hands caressed my cheeks, a tender smile on her face. Behind her I saw my reflection. It gazed back at me with bloodshot eyes. All signs of my natural color were gone, and I barely recognized my own face. I had a longing for a version of myself that no longer existed, forever lost to me. Soon, you will face your final test, she foretold, and didn't elaborate on what that would be. We heard more movement in the forest, and in the distance, teams of people searched for the missing lovers we hunted and feasted on. They searched for any remains. I could hear their shouts, calling out the names of the deceased, and the faint barking of sniffer dogs who caught their scent. Unfortunately for them, they were already dead. A car door slammed outside, and 3 people walked toward the door with their flashlights in their hands. I looked to her for guidance, unsure how to proceed, and she stepped backward into one of the rooms with a wicked, knowing smile, leaving me to my fate. The knock was loud and demanding. I ran to the sink, washing myself off as quickly as I could, cleansing myself of the dirt and the blood. Soon my naked body was concealed in a bathrobe, and I wrapped my hair in a towel. Hopefully they wouldn't see too much in the dark. I opened the door. They shined the light in my face and I was blinded, covering my eyes when I heard her voice inside my head. Ring them inside. For a second I forgot how to speak. Would you like to come in? I choked out, not having used my voice for some time. I couldn't understand the words that came from their lips anymore. I led them into the dining room. They covered their mouths and noses to keep the foul smell of a corpse in the early stages of decomposition at bay. One I didn't even notice, having become used to the aroma of death. One of them noticed the grime and blood on my lower legs. They stared in horror at the sight of the previous victim, and drew their pistols when they realized they were inside with the killer. I heard the door slam and lock, trapping them inside with us. My mouth opened and my old teeth fell out, bounced on the floor, and I felt my new fangs pierce through. It cracked and squished, twisting out, and I saw my reflection in their terrified eyes. It hurt. My blood was now pitch black and dribbled down my chin. I barely made out her form as she moved between them, a shadow barely seen by their eyes, and only one had the sense to look in her direction. He turned his head to one side for her to pass unseen. The knife was tenderly placed in my hand, and I felt the reassuring touch of the hilt. Kill them all. Make them pay in blood. Thank you so much for the 4K subscribers, everyone. It really means a lot to me. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.